under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
liberty and
liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I'm not sure that I need to read the housekeeping. I think we've had enough of these meetings, but if someone would like me to, just let me know. And we'll go on to item number 4, which is public comments. Lisa, do we have any public comments?
I haven't received any public comments, and I am not seeing anybody with their hand raised.
Okay, and are there any additions or revisions to the agenda?
No, sir.
All right, so we'll move on to item number 6, the consent calendar. Are there any items that commissioners would like pulled for today? Seeing no one raise their hand, I will entertain a motion. Please, when you make a motion, identify who you are and or what city you're from. Thank you.
Palm Desert moves approval.
Mesa seconds.
And we'll take a roll call.
District 2,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
Beaumont,
Yes.
Banning, Mesa,
Yes.
Canyon Lake, Cathedral City,
yes,
Coachella, Desert Hot Springs,
Aye.
Lake Elsinore,
Aye.
Palm Desert,
Yes.
Palm Springs,
Aye.
San Jacinto, Riverside,
Aye.
Wildemar,
Wildemar, aye.
Thank you. The item does pass.
Thank you. Next up is item 7, proposed budget for fiscal year 21-22, and a staff report from Michelle Cisneros.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'd like to start out my presentation, which is going to outline the Commission's initial draft of our fiscal year 22 budget. I'll review our budget process and the considerations for this year's budget, and we'll look to you for any input. Next slide, please. The Commission's budget process involves several important steps. In December, we began our budget development by preparing revenue projections. And in January and February, we had updated the Commission and departmental goals and objectives. Since early March, the Finance Department has begun to compile budget data that was submitted by our departments, and we will continue to analyze and reconcile the various pieces of that budget. The result of our initial effort is the executive summary that is being presented to you. Today, we are seeking your input on the proposed budget, and we will bring the final and complete budget document to the Commission on June 9th for the closing of the public hearing and the budget adoption, which is required by June 15th of each year. Next slide, please. The Commission's practice has been to accumulate revenues for specific projects and programs, since we have the flexibility to adjust project development. With lean staffing relative to the required tasks and demands, the Commission outsources a significant portion of work to various consultants. The revenue projections approved by the Commission in January for our Measure A and LTF sales tax revenues and our TUMF revenues are included in this preliminary budget. These projections assume the sales tax and the TUMF revenues would remain flat through fiscal year 22. These projections considered the limited economic data that was available at that time, and they were very conservative. Despite the COVID-19 pandemic and its impacts over the last year, our sales tax revenues in Riverside County have performed surprisingly much better than we expected. This can be contributed to the Measure A sales tax that is based on destination versus point of sale. And additionally, the timing of the Wayfair decision benefited the Commission due to the large volume of online sales during the pandemic. This has made the Commission resilient during the COVID-19 pandemic. And later in this presentation, I'll discuss a possible increase in our sales tax revenue projections. Based on the current revenue projections, reserves will be used to fund some of our capital projects as well as our transit needs. Our financing needs will require our final drawdown on the I-15 Express Lanes project TIFIA loan in early fiscal year 22. We will also resume the refinancing of the 91 Express Lanes toll debt that the Commission approved back in March of 2020 at the 2020 meeting, but we had to postpone it soon thereafter due to market disruptions from the COVID-19. Some of the primary goals for the refinancing were to achieve debt service savings and to increase our ability to fund and accelerate 91 projects with some surplus revenues. We are currently updating our traffic and revenue projections and then the financing model so that we can revise our legal documents, bring them back to the Commission for approval, and hopefully complete the transaction in fall if the market conditions are right. Next slide, please. Staff anticipates beginning our new fiscal year with a $1 billion in fund balance. Fiscal year 22 estimated sources are budgeted at $1.6 billion and estimated uses at $1.7 billion. The budget anticipates that uses will exceed sources by $143 million, resulting in the use of project and program fund balances reserves, primarily for the 15 Express Lanes completion, the Lake Elsinore 15 Railroad Canyon, the 79 realignment, the Mid-County Parkway, including the 215 Placentia interchange and its second construction project, the closeout of the 91 project, the Coachella Valley, Measure A Highway and regional arterial projects, and various transit and specialized transportation projects using LTF, STA, and Measure A funds. Of the $858 million projected ending fund balance, 99.4% is restricted for specific projects and programs that are funded with Measure A, TDA, motorist assistance, and toll operations. The remaining 0.6% is assigned for management services. Next slide. The Commission's revenues come from several different sources, but primarily from sales tax revenues and federal and state reimbursements. The sales tax revenue projections approved by the Commission in January assumed flat revenues of $195 million for Measure A and $100 million for LTF for fiscal year 22. The Measure A revenues represent about 12% of our annual sources, and they are distributed to the 3 geographic areas. Western County will receive $152 million or 78%. Coachella Valley will receive $42 million or 21%. And Palo Verde Valley will receive about $1 million or 1%. Our LTF revenues represent 6% of the total sources, and our STA represents 2% of total sources. Our intergovernmental revenues at 21% consist primarily of federal and state reimbursements for project costs, which will tend to vary with project activity. Some of those significant projects will include the Mid-County Parkway, the 215 Placentia interchange and its second construction project, the 7191 connector, the 60 truck lanes, the 15 express lanes southern extension, the 91 corridor operations project, the 1591 express lanes connector, the Harupa and McKinley Avenue grade separation projects, and our rail station rehabilitation and improvements. Our TOMP revenues represent less than 1% of our total sources. Our estimated tolls, penalties, and fees at 4% of our total sources include the 91 Express Lanes revenues at $41.5 million. And this is for the 5th full year of 91 Express Lanes toll operations, as well as $23.6 million for the first full year of the 15 Express Lanes operations. Other revenues and investment income account for less than 1% of our total sources, and interest rates are so low that our investment income is expected to be minimal. Our transfers in at 12% of sources are primarily for our debt service funding, our 15 Express Lanes project, our 1591 Express Lanes connector, the Hamner Bridge widening, the Mid-County Parkway and 215 Placentia interchange, and our rail maintenance and operations. Our debt proceeds relate to the refinancing of the 91 Express Lanes toll debt, and staff also anticipates the final drawdown of the TIFIA loan to fund the 91 Express Lanes project in fiscal year 22. Next slide, please. This chart shows the comparison of all commission sources. Many of the fiscal year 22 revenues are relatively flat compared to fiscal year 21, with the exception of our intergovernmental reimbursements and debt proceeds. Intergovernmental reimbursements are higher by about 24%, and this is primarily due to the Mid-County Parkway 215 Placentia interchange and its second construction project, the 7191 connector, the 60 truck lanes, the 15 express lane southern extension, one corridor project, the 1591 express lanes connector, and the Harupa and McKinley Avenue grade separation projects. Our debt proceeds are higher due to the refinancing of the 91 express lanes toll debt later this fall. Any adjustments to our fiscal year 22 revenue projections can be made in the next few weeks and will be reflected in the final budget that will be presented to the Commission in June. Next slide. This table shows the Commission's program operations and capital project uses by department. In a couple of slides, I'll highlight some of the capital highway, rail, and regional arterial projects provided in the budget. Our capital local streets and roads expenditures are the Measure A sales tax revenues returned to the local jurisdictions and remain flat. Our commuter assistance reflects a 10% decrease due to the declines in projected van pools and the restructuring of the rideshare van pool platforms. Our debt service reflects a significant increase due to the refinancing of the 91 express lanes toll debt that is anticipated this fall. Our management services increased 2%, and this is primarily due to the FTE allocations and new positions to maintain service levels for a full year, professional and support of the Riverside Conservation Management, and commission insurance. Our motorist assistance and planning and programming remained relatively flat. Our public and specialized transit reflects about a 32% increase, and this is primarily due to the decreased operating subsidy needs in the previous year that resulted from the available federal COVID relief funding. This budget includes the estimated allocations for transit operations and capital, and staff is still reviewing the SRTPs. So any update amounts will be included in the final budget that is presented at the June Commission meeting. Our rail maintenance and operations decreased about 18%, and this is due to the inability to obtain access agreements with the host railroads for the Indio Special Events Train platform for the Coachella Valley San Gregorio Pass corridor rail service. Our regional conservation increased about 172% due to a full year of RCA management as compared to only 6 months of management in fiscal year 21. The Commission became the managing agency for RCA in January of 2021. Our toll operations reflects a 101% increase due to a full year of operations for the I-15 express lanes, the required repair and rehabilitation activity on the 91 express lanes, and the use of surplus toll revenues for the 1591 express lanes connector. Next slide, please. This chart shows the significance of the Commission's primary project-driven environment as reflected in our capital highway, rail, and regional arterial category, and represents about 36% of our total budget. Our local streets and roads, which is the Measure A sales tax revenues returned to the local jurisdictions, represents 3% of our total budget. Debt service primarily reflects the refinancing of the 91 express lanes toll debt and represents 42% of our total budget. Commuter assistance, management services, motorist assistance, planning and programming, and regional conservation are a very small percentage of our total expenditures and altogether represents only 3% of our total budget. Public and specialized transit represents 9%, and rail maintenance and operations 3% of our total budget. Toll operations is for the 91 express lanes and our 15 express lanes is only 4% of the Commission's total budget. Next slide, please. Significant capital projects identified for fiscal year 22 include to continue activities to complete the I-15 express lanes, construction and design build activities for the 1591 express lanes connector that is funded primarily by SB 132, construction activities for the 91 corridor operations project, wrap up various activities on the 91 project, primarily related to right-of-way activities, engineering, construction, and right-of-way activities for the Mid-County Parkway 215 Placentia interchange and its second construction project, construction activities on the 60 truck lanes, as well as other capital projects, which include the 7191 connector, the 15 express lane southern extension, the 15 corridor operations project, the Pachapa underpass, the Harupa and McKinley Avenue grade separation projects, and various rail and regional arterial projects. Next slide, please. This table presents the Commission's expenditure by function, whereas the previous slides had focused on the department level. The $1.9 million or 14% increase in salaries and benefits is related to a full year of additional staff for regional conservation and maintaining management service levels, reinstatement of funding for 4 previously funded positions, a 4% pool for performance merit-based salary increases, and an annual salary range adjustment. Our professional services are expected to decrease 8% due to the completion of the traffic relief plan, the refocusing of rail operations planning efforts, as well as a change in the hosting of the regional rideshare van pool system platforms. Our support costs have increased 5%, and this is primarily for the support and maintenance of toll operations, which includes the first full year of the 15 express lanes operations. Projects and operations will increase about 15%, and this is based on the project activities that I had noted just in the previous slide. Our debt service will increase significantly, and this is due to the refinancing of the 91 express lanes toll debt. And our capital outlay will increase about 5% for station rehabilitation projects. Next slide, please. This chart provides our projects and operations and our debt service, and they are our largest functional expenditure groups. This chart also illustrates the Commission's core project-driven environment with an operations component that is related to the 91 and the 15 express lanes. It's important to reiterate that the primary sources to fund our projects and operations costs come from new revenues such as our sales taxes, our federal and state reimbursements, project fund balance reserves, as well as transfers from our debt proceeds. Next slide, please. This budget is still a work in progress, and the final budget presented to the Commission in June will reflect adjustments to revenues and costs as needed based on our continued analysis. We will also continue to monitor all of our revenue trends and project reimbursement from federal and state agencies. The fiscal year 22 budget reflects that we will be below the 1% Measure A cap on management services, salaries, and benefits at 0.71%. Additionally, in regard to the board adopted policy limiting the total management services cost to 4%, we project those costs to be at 2%. The Commission, organization, and staffing discussions are still pending with the Executive Committee, and any changes based on their direction will be included in the budget at the June public hearing. We are looking to gather input on this proposed budget today and at the public meeting in June. As noted in an earlier slide, we want to discuss possibly increasing our sales tax revenue projections due to the better than expected sales taxes in Riverside County compared to other areas in California. Our quarter-over-quarter comparison basis, RCTC had about a 7% overall growth. While most economic categories had growth, the only decline was food products at almost 10%, and this was mainly related to restaurants. Our sales tax consultant revised its revenue projections for RCTC's Measure A and factored in the impacts from the stimulus legislation. These projections are about 8% for fiscal year 21 and 15% for fiscal year 22, higher than our original January projections. Finally, the consultant also noted that the much shorter recovery period that Riverside County is experiencing from the COVID recession compared to the Great Recession more than a decade ago. Based on better economic data that is available to us now, staff is proposing to increase our Measure A and LTF revenue projections to $210 million and $105 million respectively for both fiscal years 21 and fiscal year 22. We welcome your input on revising these projections, which, if supported, would be included as an adjustment in our final budget to be presented in the May-June cycles. And lastly, following the Commission's management of the RCA in January, our right-of-way staff has immediately began work on the RCA Habitat Acquisition Program and began incurring costs to the Commission consultant contracts. After further analysis of the fiscal year 21 regional conservation right-of-way expenditures, staff has determined that an additional $250,000 budget adjustment is needed to carry us through June. As noted in item number 3 of our staff report, staff is requesting your approval for a fiscal year 21 budget adjustment of $250,000 for right-of-way expenditures and its related reimbursement. We will then finalize our budget for the June Commission meeting with the closing of our public hearing and adopting of our final budget. This does conclude my presentation of our budget, and I thank you for your time and look to you for your input.
Thank you, Ms. Cisneros.
Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments at this time? Well, while you're thinking about it, I do have a question or a request that I'd like to make. The information that you provided is very helpful, and I went through the whole budget because I love to look at budgets, and it was very detailed, and I appreciate that. I did want to know, and again, probably because of my background, I'm employed by a GIS company, but I'd love to see a GIS map of expenditures by geographical location or city or region or project, just to get an idea of where we've been spending our money for the last 5 years or so. And as well as something that would show the projects that are in your list, the projects that we're budgeting funding for. It helps me when I can look at a map and get a good understanding of where we are. There's a lot of, it would be nice also if this could have traffic patterns and populations. And I'm not expecting this to be done or, before the June meeting with the budget, but just something for future budget. I think it'd be a good idea for us to understand where we're spending our money, where the populations are, and where the traffic patterns are. I think it'd be more helpful for some of us who don't see a lot of our projects show up, but we know that our projects are in line to be worked on. But I'd love to see a historical pattern. I don't know, Anne, is that something that we could possibly do?
Yes, it is. We've taken some notes, and so we'll work on that.
Okay, great. And now that I do see some questions, let's start with Supervisor Washington.
Thank you. First, I want to thank Michelle for an outstanding and very thorough, if at sometimes a little dry, but that's how budget presentations go. And I want to thank Anne for her tremendous leadership. And the points that jumped out at me were the limitation placed on administrative costs by Measure A of 1% or less, and we're at 0.7. And the administrative fee and cost placed on the commission through policy of under 4%, and we are at 2%. That, I can't imagine any other organization being able to achieve that level of efficiency and still maintain such a high level of efficacy. So I just want to thank Anne for her leadership and acknowledge that here publicly.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. The team does a great job.
Thank you, Supervisor. Commissioner Middleton, you're up, and then Commissioner Harnick, you'll be next.
All right. Thank you. And I want to echo Commissioner Washington's comments fully and appreciate him for expressing them. The number that jumps out at us in the budget is the change in debt service Could we get just a bit more of an explanation of what it is that we're accomplishing with the refinancing of the 91 toll road?
Michelle, I'll go ahead and handle that one. On the refinancing of the 91 debt, the intent is to refinance a portion of the toll revenue bonds that are outstanding, just under 125 million. And then also to refinance the TIFIA loan with bonds. So we would take TIFIA out. The current balance of the TIFIA loan, I believe, is almost $500 million. And so when we take those out, repay the federal government for the TIFIA loan and the investors of the old bonds, some of those proceeds will be in an escrow account for the bonds, the former bonds, and then paying TIFIA out. So that's what the increase in debt service is related to.
Right. Are we getting significantly better interest rates with this refinance?
That is the hope. We had planned when we brought this to you in March of last year to achieve savings greater than our 3% target for refunding or refinancing. And within 24 hours, if you haven't approved that, everything went crazy, and we weren't able to move forward and achieve those savings. So with the update of the traffic and revenue study, we'll be updating our financial model so that we can still try and meet our objectives that we took to you last March, and figure out how to make this financing work such that we achieve those debt service savings.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Harnick, you're up.
Thank you. And actually, after the request made by Chair White, the comments by Supervisor Washington, and questions and comments by Commissioner Middleton, there, I'm not going to take anybody else's time and repeat them. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Gregory.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the presentation. And I appreciate the answers to the questions. I just wanted to, though, to kind of piggyback on Commissioner Middleton's question. I had a question on debt service, and I just want to make sure, it seems like the answer is obvious, but this increase in debt service is it's a 1 year for the refinance, is that correct? And then debt service would return to more historic levels, perhaps even below. Am I hearing that correctly?
You are correct. It's just a 1 year peak, very unusual because of the size of the refinancing. So after the refinancing, it would return to the normal level for both the toll debt and our sales tax debt.
Thank you so much. I assumed so, but I didn't want to make an error by doing so. Thank you so much for clarifying. That was all.
Thank you, Commissioner Gregory. Commissioner Spiegel, I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I have to tag on to what Supervisor Washington said. I think that with the percentage that we are so far below what is the directive from Measure A, yet Measure A is even lower than what the average organization has for its budgeting purposes. And I have to say is that the fiscal responsibility of this organization, and I know that, we have a board and we approve it, but it's you as a staff that put this forward, that do the deep work and that keep us on track. And I have to give kudos and thank you for always being on top of this. With that being said, if we can get a printout of this, the slide, and I want to go through it again, but I tell you, it is very impressive. As I said, just thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
We'll get a copy of the PowerPoint out to all members of the committee.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? So at this time, I'll entertain a motion.
Spiegel moves.
Second, my third district.
And could we have a roll call vote, please?
District 2,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
Beaumont,
Yes.
Calamasa,
A grateful yes.
Cathedral City,
Yes.
Desert Hot Springs,
Aye.
Lake Elsinore,
Aye.
Palm Desert,
Yes.
Palm Springs,
Aye.
Riverside,
Yes.
Wildemar.
Wildemar, yes.
Thank you. That item passes.
Thank you. Item 8 is agreements for audit and attestation services, and that's a presentation by Teresa Trevino, please.
Good morning, Chair White and Commissioners. RCTC periodically procures audit services from firms for Transportation Development Act claimants and Measure A recipients. There are two types of audit services that are procured. One is a financial and compliance audit of the fund, which results in an audit opinion on the financial statements and a report on compliance and internal control. The other is an attestation service referred to as agreed upon procedures determined by RCTC to more effectively evaluate compliance with funding requirements. The results of the procedures performed are summarized in a report. The current RCTC agreements expire in the next few weeks following the completion of fiscal year 2020 work. The RCA obtained similar services from a firm under a contract that had one option year remaining. Since the goal of the implementation and management services agreement between the RCA and RCTC was to consolidate professional agreements as much as possible, staff determined that RCA's required services should be incorporated into the planned procurement. Staff anticipates efficiencies for RCTC and the RCA related to the planning and oversight of these audit services. Additionally, disruption to local jurisdictions and agencies can be minimized by assigning work elements to one firm rather than multiple firms. This agenda item is to award agreements to public accounting firms for audit and attestation services based on two related procurements. Next slide, please. There are three general work elements related to the Transportation Development Act, or TDA, Measure A, and RCA's Multiple Species Habitat Conservation Plan, or MSHCP. The state's TDA requires financial and compliance audits for claimants of Article 4 transit funds allocated annually to transit operators and of Article 3 bicycle and pedestrian funds awarded every 2 years based on a call for projects. In the May-June commission cycle, staff will bring award recommendations for the current call for projects for bicycle and pedestrian projects. The Article 3 audits can vary annually based on actual disbursements of funds to the claimants. Since RTA and Sunline elected to hire their own auditors and submit the required reports to RCTC, RCTC, as the administrator of the TDA funds, obtains the audits for the 4 Western County municipal transit operators and the Palo Verde Valley Transit Agency, as well as the bicycle and pedestrian claimants. Measure A requires audits of the local streets and roads funds, and RCTC has required audits in the grant agreements of Measure A specialized transit recipients. RCTC uses agreed upon procedures to evaluate Measure A compliance. All 28 cities in Riverside County and the county receive local streets and roads funds. The specialized transit recipients are determined every 3 years based on a call for projects. Later today at the Western Riverside County Programs and Projects Committee, they will be taking action on staff's recommendation for the recent call for funding of fiscal 22 through 24. The final work element is related to RCA's evaluation of its member agencies' compliance with the collection and remittance of MSHCP fees. RCA also uses agreed upon procedures to evaluate compliance for all Western Riverside County cities and the county that are the member agencies. This is a major effort of many local jurisdictions and agencies that results in over 70 reports for RCTC and the RCA. With this background on the required audits, let's discuss the procurement results. Next slide, please. I've been on both sides of these audits over the past 33 years as the auditor and as RCTC CFO. I've seen changes in the types of firms performing governmental work. In the prior two procurements, RCTC has awarded the work to multiple firms due to the volume of work and the number of reports to be issued in order to ensure timely completion of the work. With the addition of the MSHCP work, this year's procurement was split into two RFPs with anticipated contract awards to multiple firms under each RFP. With multiple contract awards possible, staff wanted to encourage competition and provide an opportunity for qualified small local firms to submit proposals. The RFPs were very similar. However, the scope for one RFP was for the Western County TDA claimants, Measure A recipients, and MSHCP member agencies, while the other was for Eastern County TDA claimants and Measure A local street and road recipients. The RFPs were released on February 18, and questions from interested firms were submitted by March 1. RCTC responded to all questions submitted. 9 proposals were submitted under the Western County RFP and 8 proposals under Eastern County by the March 18 deadline. An evaluation committee of finance and transit program staff reviewed and scored all written proposals. Based on the evaluation criteria in the RFPs, the committee recommended that contracts be awarded to the top 4 Western County proposals and top 2 Eastern County proposals. Then the work was allocated such that one firm would complete all required work elements for a local jurisdiction or community organization. Fees were then calculated based on pricing submitted with the proposals. While the evaluation committee recommends 6 contracts in total, 4 firms were selected. BCA Watson Rice will perform the Measure A specialized transit procedures at all community organizations and the other work elements for 2 cities. Brown Armstrong will perform the work elements for 10 Western County and 2 Eastern County cities and the county. Conrad will perform the work elements for 2 Western County and 8 Eastern County cities and the Palo Verde Valley Transit Agency. I. Bailey will perform the work elements for 4 Western County cities, including the municipal transit operators. Staff estimates that these financial and compliance audits and agreed upon procedures will approximate over 2,600 hours for Western County and almost 800 hours for Eastern County. That's about 3,400 hours for more than 70 reports to be completed in about a 6-month period. On the next slide, I'll summarize the recommendations. Next slide, please. In addition to forwarding the staff report to the Commission for final action, there are 4 recommendations. First is to award 4 agreements to BCA, Brown Armstrong, Conrad, and I. Bailey for an initial 3-year term with 3 one-year options to extend the agreements for a total aggregate amount of $1,524,661 plus a contingency amount of $75,339 for additional audits or unforeseen services for a total aggregate amount not to exceed $1.6 million. Second is to award 2 agreements to Brown Armstrong and Conrad for an initial 3-year term with 3 one-year options to extend the agreements for a total aggregate amount of $413,160 plus a contingency amount of $19,840 for a total aggregate amount not to exceed $433,000. Third is to authorize the chair or executive director pursuant to legal counsel review to finalize and execute the agreements, including the option years. And finally, authorize the executive director or designee to approve contingency work up to the total not to exceed amount. The total amount for all 6 contracts is $2,033,000. This concludes my presentation, and I welcome any comments or questions.
Thank you, Ms. Trevino. And do we have any questions or comments from commissioners? Wow, I guess they really like to report. Okay, at this time, if still no one has any comments, let's go ahead and entertain a motion.
Moved.
I'll move the item. Benoit.
Second.
And roll call, please.
District 2,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
Beaumont,
Yes.
Calamasa,
Yes.
Cathedral City,
Yes.
Desert Hot Springs,
Aye.
Lake Elsinore,
Aye.
Palm Desert,
Yes.
Palm Springs,
Aye.
Riverside,
Yes.
Wildemar.
Aye.
Thank you. The item passes.
Thank you. Item 9, the 2021 Mid-Cycle State Transportation Improvement Program Funding Distribution and Programming. And Ms. Guizato, please.
Good morning, Chair White and committee members. 4 months ago, Congress passed and the President signed the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, or CRRSA. CRRSA provides $912 million of transportation funding to California. The California Transportation Commission, or CTC, voted to distribute the funds as follows: 60% to the State Highway Operation and Protection Program, or SHOP, which is administered by Caltrans, 40% to regional agencies, with half of the 40% going through the State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP, and the other half through the traditional federal formula distribution, which goes out to counties by population. California's STIP program is typically administered every 2 years by the CTC. The last STIP that was adopted was for 2020 in March 2020. The next traditional STIP will be the 2022 STIP, and in the coming months, staff will be bringing a couple of items to this committee and the commission for consideration related to the 2022 STIP. In the meantime, with half of the 40% regional share of CRRSA stimulus funds coming to the commission, today I'm requesting your consideration of what is being called the 2021 mid-cycle STIP. Dating back a couple of decades, the commission has a policy for distributing STIP funds equitably across Riverside County's 3 geographic regions. This is via the STIP Intra-County Memorandum of Understanding, whereby the most recent fiscal year taxable sales by geographic area are used for Measure A allocations. This method is ideal as it provides the Coachella Valley a slight advantage over using the more traditional formula of population share. Today, staff is proposing to use the previously adopted 2020 STIP intra-county formula, which is seen on Table 1 on page 243. Before distributing the STIP funds according to the formula, the Commission's standard practice as allowed under STIP program guidelines is to set aside 2% for planning, programming, and monitoring activities. These are flexible funds that can cover anything from project study reports to staff time and are shared with the Coachella Valley Association of Governments. With a total 2021 mid-cycle STIP programming capacity of a little more than $10,200,000, $205,000 is proposed to be taken off the top for STIP planning, programming, and monitoring. The remainder is proposed to be distributed per the STIP intra-county distribution, as seen in Table 2 on page 244 in your agenda package. As previously mentioned, STIP funds are administered by the CTC and typically require a detailed package to be submitted for approval. In order to program the funds as quickly as possible, the CTC has relaxed some of its guidelines, but still requires quick action on recipient agencies' behalf. To decrease the administrative burden on commission staff, we're recommending the commission approve swapping the Coachella Valley share of 2021 mid-cycle STIP funds with federal formula funds and approve programming $10,069,068 on the 7191 connector project, programming $205,491 for planning, programming, and monitoring, swapping the Coachella Valley STIP share of $2,159,815 for surface transportation block grant federal formula funds, and trading $43,297 of Palo Verde Valley STIP share funds with Measure A Western County Highway funds to facilitate delivery of local arterial projects. Hopefully I made this as straightforward as possible. I know there are a lot of actions being requested and a lot of acronyms to digest, so I'm more than happy to take any of your questions at this time.
Thank you for that report. Are there anyone who wishes to speak on this item before we take a vote? But seeing no hands raised, I will entertain a motion.
I'll move staff's recommendation, third district.
Benoit will second.
And roll call, please.
District 2,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
Beaumont,
Yes.
Calamasa, Calamasa,
Yes.
thank you. Cathedral City,
Yes.
Desert Hot Springs,
Aye.
Lake Elsinore,
Aye.
Palm Desert,
Yes.
Palm Springs,
Aye.
Riverside,
Aye.
Wildemar.
Aye.
Thank you. The item passes.
Thank you. Mayor, I'm sorry. Ann, would you like to make a comment?
Sure. Thank you, Commissioners. Just to let you know, we did review this with CVAG prior to making this CVAG staff prior to making this recommendation, and they were supportive, especially because by making this swap, we could minimize the amount of administrative overhead for both agencies. And so, we'll always take additional funding into the county, and this allows us to do so in the most streamlined way possible. I just wanted to confirm that CVAG staff was supportive of this recommendation.
Thank you. Item 10, state and federal legislative update from David Knudsen.
Good morning, Chair Whiting, committee members. Let me start by saying it's been a very busy and productive month since my last update to this committee. At the state level, legislative committees are holding hearings and considering legislation. As a result, I will seek the commission's position on two bills today, SB 261 by Senator Ben Allen and AB 840 authored by Chris Holden. I'll begin today with SB 261. SB 261 would extend greenhouse gas reduction targets and add new VMT reduction targets, increase scrutiny and double checking a metropolitan planning organization's sustainable community strategy, and adds new reporting requirements, including for local government on the number of housing, jobs, and transit supportive infrastructure. SB 261 adds additional requirements to policies created by SB 375, passed in 2008. Which directed CARB to set regional targets for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the vehicles and light duty truck sector for 2020 and 2035. MPOs like SCAG and county transportation commissions like RCTC have been working in partnership with each other and with CARB to meet the Southern California region's greenhouse gas reduction targets. RCTC is committed to doing our part to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. However, SB 261 has several negative impacts. One, it upends our local partnership, like the one we have with SCAG. Two, it gives new power to CARB staff. And three, it unfairly penalizes commuter communities whose residents cannot afford to live near job centers. As a result of the issues identified in the bill, staff is recommending the commission take an opposed position. This recommendation is consistent with the commission's adopted 2021 state and federal legislative platform, including one, oppose efforts to place new environmental criteria, such as greenhouse gas reduction or vehicle miles traveled reduction, on transportation projects and programs without commensurate funding for alternatives or mitigations. And two, policies should be implemented recognizing regional variance by distinguishing high growth regions for their impact on the economy, environment, and should be dynamic in order to address future population growth. Next is AB 840, authored by Assemblymember Chris Holden, and would require the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority and LA Metro to jointly develop a funding and implementation program for regional transit services to include service to international airports. This bill is basically another attempt after two bills last year, AB 211 and SB 1390, were introduced to compel SBCTA to extend the Metro Gold Line to Ontario International Airport. These bills failed to pass out of the legislature, and RCTC submitted letters opposing them. While the specific matters at the center of this legislation do not apply directly to RCTC or Riverside County, if approved, this bill creates a troublesome precedent for RCTC and all self-help transportation agencies in California, including involving the state and the working partnerships between county transportation commissions, and challenging the independent decision-making of Regional Transportation Authority. Staff's recommendation for the commission to take an opposed position is consistent with the adopted 2021 state and federal legislative platform, including one, existing statutory authorities for the commission should be preserved and protected, and two, oppose legislation that restructures or interferes with governance of the commission or other local and regional transportation agencies without support and consent of the entity affected. Taking a position on these bills is important as staff works to advance the commission's voice in Sacramento. Very quickly, the legislature will be busy over the next few weeks as focus turns to the state budget. The governor will provide his May budget revision, which will take into account any adjustments to the state's revenue or any changes he wants to make to his 2021-22 budget proposal. The California Department of Finance released an economic update in March with preliminary general fund tax receipts for the first 8 months of the fiscal year. According to its report, tax receipts were $14 billion above the governor's budget forecast. This combined with this $26 billion in federal COVID-19 relief California is expected to receive from the American Rescue Plan, the governor and the legislature may decide to increase the state's discretionary spending. Staff will continue to monitor how the governor and the legislature will ultimately decide to use the windfall of revenue and keep the board updated on any progress. June 15th, 2021 is the constitutional deadline for the legislature to pass a budget. Looking now quickly at the federal landscape, there's a lot of activity taking place in Congress. With the return of earmarks, now branded as community project funding in the House, the Legislative Affairs team, along with our planning and programming, project delivery, multimodal, toll, and public affairs teams worked under significant and very short timelines to submit community project funding for transportation infrastructure projects to Representatives Calvert, Takano, and Ruiz. We requested a total of $38.5 million related to 6 projects. As you know, our requests are the first part of the process. Each congressional office will take all the requests, submit them to the House Appropriations Committee and Transportation and Infrastructure Committee for final consideration. As part of our advocacy efforts, we engaged our public affairs team to generate social media posts and implement other outreach efforts to seek public support for our projects. We also sought out and received stakeholder support letters, including from cities and chamber groups. This kind of legislative and community engagement does 2 things. One, it communicates RCTC's activities to the public, stakeholders, and cities and asks for their buy-in in our efforts. And 2, it helps us show Congress that people in their districts care and support for RCTC's activities. It is to our benefit that our communities know we are seeking funding at every opportunity. Finally, President Biden will address a joint session of the Congress on April 28th, 2021. This address comes on the heels of his recently unveiled budget proposal and the $2.3 trillion American Jobs Plan, which at this point is a proposal and not yet a piece of legislation. Congress will have a lot to consider over the next few months, and we will be monitoring closely and engaging in the process. This concludes my report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Does anybody have questions or want to speak on this item? Executive Director Mayer.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments on those bills. As David mentioned, we've been actively coordinating with SCAG and other regional partners on the 261 bill. And there are significant concerns about the impact to the regional transportation plan, which is a comprehensive plan, as you know, for the entire region. So I just wanted to clarify that we are working very closely with SCAG, and there are discussions taking place at SCAG regarding that bill. Related to the bill for LA Metro and San Bernardino, access to Ontario Airport is certainly an important item. I would like to point out that San Bernardino already has their plans in place for a rail connection to Ontario Airport. They have a sales tax measure that describes what their projects will be. And so, I think to David's point about protecting the statutory authority of regional transportation decision makers is really, really crucial. San Bernardino does have proactive plans to connect to Ontario Airport. They're just not the same plans that others would like, which is merely an extension of the Gold Line. So, that is an important bill for us to watch as well, because we could be in a situation, if this passes, that the legislature will start mandating to commissions like RCTC what projects we will build. That's a very dangerous precedent to be set. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so we'll move that on. I guess we do need a motion, or don't we?
We do.
Okay.
Staff recommendation, Cathedral City.
Thank you.
Riverside second.
And roll call, please.
District 2,
Yes.
District 3,
Yes.
Beaumont,
Yes.
Calamasa,
Yes.
Cathedral City,
Yes.
Desert Hot Springs,
Aye.
Lake Elsinore, Palm Desert,
Yes.
Palm Springs,
Aye.
Riverside,
Yes.
Wildemar, thank you. That item does pass.
Okay, thank you. We had no items pulled from the consent calendar, so we'll move on to staff report. Are there any commissioners or staff who'd like to make comments at this time? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead and adjourn. And the next meeting will be held 9:30, May 24th. We'll see you all then.
Thank you.